Turning 70 years old and reflecting on a whirlwind first year as pontiff, Pope Leo is opening up in his very first interview since becoming the first American to lead the Catholic Church. Reflecting back on his first few months, Pope Leo says that he still has a huge learning curve ahead of him and that he had to, quote, jump in on the deep end of the pool very quickly. It was a nearly 3-hour conversation. It also signals a new openness to the media and one that comes notably earlier than Pope Francis's first interview, just months into his own papacy. Pope Leo was also asked during this conversation about his roots, including, of course, his ties to Latin America.
So I'm obviously an American, and I very much feel that I'm an American, but I also love very much Peru, the Peruvian people, and so that is a part of who I am. Half of my ministerial life was spent in Peru, so the Latin American perspective is very valuable to me, and I think comes out also in an appreciation that I have for the life of the Church from Latin America.
Joining me right now is a journalist who spoke to Pope Leo for this big interview, Elise Ann Allen, senior correspondent for Conduct. It's great to see you. There's so much more to come in this, but what we've seen so far, it seems like a really fascinating conversation with him. His first major interview since becoming Pope. Just generally speaking, what stood out most to you in terms of what you spoke about, his priorities, his message, or just his general feeling about it all?
Well, good morning, Kate. It's wonderful to be with you. Obviously, anytime you interview a pope, it's a big deal and it's very exciting. I'd say what stood out most to me about Pope Leo is just how calm he was. He's somebody who's very calm. He's very natural. You don't get the sense that he's fabricating anything or that there is a veneer, that he's trying to put on, give you some sort of impression. He's somebody that's extremely natural and very comfortable with himself and very comfortable with other people. And that came off very clearly and very immediately in our conversation. He's very sincere and wanted to give very direct and transparent answers. So that was something that was very notable and is obviously a great feeling when you're trying to have an interview with somebody. It was a very good vibe, I would say. And he spoke about a lot of things. This is 2 different conversations that we had that were about an hour and a half each. So the first one was talking just about his life and his biography, the different points along his career and his missionary life in Peru, also in terms of his time in leading his order, but also here in Rome. So we covered a lot of ground, but then the second part of it was sort of looking to the future. What are sort of the hot button issues that he wants to pay attention to and that are relevant in terms of the church and the world today? And so that's where we got into some more newsy topics, and he really focused on the social issues. Those are something that's very close to his heart, especially given his time and his service in Peru. So anything that has to deal with the environment, that has to deal with poverty, the issues of migration, those are things he was all very deeply involved in as a missionary and even as a bishop in Peru. And there's some things that really remain close to his heart. So you got a sense really that the social agenda is something that's going to be very much a priority for this Pope.
I did find it fascinating that he spoke directly to leaning into speaking about income inequality, talking about just executive compensation in general, but also even nodding to Elon Musk as kind of an example of it, the possibility of Musk becoming the world's first trillionaire. At one point, he told you this: what does that mean? And what's that about? If that is the only thing that has value anymore, then we're in big trouble. Just what you took from that, what you thought of that.
Well, it's very clear that this is a huge issue for him and he's very concerned about it. He represents the 2 poles, if you will, in this growing disparity between rich and poor. He comes from one of the wealthiest nations on earth, but also has served almost his entire priestly life in one of the poorest countries, in a country with a lot of poverty in one of the poorest regions of this country. So, he's somebody that has an experience with both of those poles, and he's really attentive to that. And he's going to be very attentive to that going forward. I think this is going to be a huge priority for him.
And connecting it all together, and that he kind of suggested that it could also be what's leading to the polarization that we see all across the world right now is kind of could be rooted in this income inequality that he's speaking to. He told you that he's got this huge learning curve that he's dealing with, kind of being thrown into being scrutinized as now a world leader. Tell me more about that.
Well, this is somebody, who had a very low profile before stepping into the role as Pope. He's somebody that didn't give many interviews, honestly, beforehand as bishop, as cardinal, and now as Pope, this is his first one. So somebody that kept a relatively low profile and was, unknown to a lot of the world, is now being thrust into this global role. It's 24/7. Everyone is watching everything he's saying and doing, everything, people know his movements, his meetings. It's a lot to take in. And he admitted that openly. He said, this is a lot. I'm learning a lot. And he's got to learn a lot about what it means to even be a world leader now. So even, in terms of how to do diplomacy, he's somebody that's followed global affairs for many years, but stepping into this role and doing it himself is very new. So he's very open and admitting that it's a learning curve. And, he's taking his time and he's getting to know, the job and how things work. So he's dipping his toe into the big end of the pool, but, he is diving in too. And we're going to see a lot more from him, I think, in the months to come.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for bringing just some of your extensive interview with the new Pope to us. It's going to be fascinating to hear much more about it and see much more of him. We really appreciate it. Great reporting, Elise and Alan. Thank you.